This is a very interesting journey for me for the last 4 years. A lot of people thought I was crazy. They probably still think it's crazy. So about a week ago, somebody asked my mom, what do you think Prasad is doing? And she's like, I still think he's crazy, right? So I'm going to talk to you about this craziness that I went through for the last 10 years. And it's going to talk about my journey from, say, the corporate boardrooms of, the Silicon Valley all the way down to setting up my own design school and why I do what I do. So I was born and brought up in an army family, right? And usually military families tend to be a little bit protected. You live, everything is ordered, everything is set up and all that. And all of a sudden, when you come out in the civilian world, it's a shock to you. Because you start realizing, there's child labor, there's abused animals, there's poverty. You see all of this and then it just messes with your head. You're like wondering, how do I fix this, right? What do I do? And there was a time when I wanted to kind of not study and go do social work. But fortunately for me, a lot of people came up to me and said I was stupid and that I need to go earn some money and do something good. So I said, that's fine. So I took the usual route. I went out to the US, got a master's degree, joined Honeywell as a research scientist, and then worked on a lot of really cool projects out there. And then moved over to Yahoo at one point when they started doing their search engine business. And what is really interesting was I was really thinking about how do you solve problems. So this is actually a direct application for the art of misdirection. So we were using how the brain works and how you perceive information and how you need to create this feature. And what was interesting at that point was in 2001, Google had come up with a similar product and put it in the labs and it never worked. And so they've kind of figured it wasn't going to work. And in 2006, I joined in 2005. So in 2006, we did an experiment called All the Web. It failed. But what was really interesting at that point was despite all of those failures, when I put this product in front of a person, normally what you see here is something called a usability lab. And what that means is you bring somebody from outside and they come and spend time in the lab using your product and you get to see them use it. And you see what's working, what's not working. So this lady came into the lab one day and she's using the product and I leave her and then I kind of go on to the other side and all of a sudden she starts crying. I'm like, wow. So normally in a company, if somebody starts crying, you're talking about a lawsuit. So I'm running to the other side and like, what happened? Are you okay? And she turns around and she says, you know what? I'm okay. I'd just been to the doctors and they told me I had diabetes. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know what to do. And I come over here and I'm using this product and all of a sudden I see these suggestions, diabetes treatments, diabetes alternative medication, diabetes, guide to living, whatever. She sees all these suggestions and at that moment she realizes she's not alone, right? She realizes that there are other people that have the same problem as she has and she's secure, right? And that was a very profound moment for me because I just realized because people would tell me like design is one of those things that allows people to change the way they look at the universe and how they look at themselves. I never got it until that moment, right? And here was a feature that she really got it, right? And so that was one of the reasons why we didn't let it go. Even though it failed in 2006, we said, no, this is a product that needs to go out. So we spent another year trying to figure out all the little kinks, figuring out why it didn't work, why it worked. And finally, when we launched it, for the next 18 months, Yahoo gained, I think, about 5 or 6% market share from Google, probably the only time in Yahoo's history, right? And it profoundly changed the way all of you search. Now think about it. When you go to search engine, when you start typing in, when you type in the first 3 alphabets and you stop, right? How many people have done that? Just raise your hands, right? There you go, right? We changed your habits without even knowing it, right? And you think about every internet user around the world has changed their habits because of the way we designed it. And that's a really important thing. And so that was actually pretty cool. And I said, you know what? I'm a hotshot, right? I know everything there is to know about design and designers can change the world, right? So I had all this. And then I said, what's the big thing? Because I've retrained everybody around the world in 1-second increments. Now can I go solve the world's problems? So what my wife and I did was we said, okay, let's quit our job at Yahoo and come down to India and go do something that solves the problem, right? Guess what? That was a romantic version, right? So my wife and I sitting in the village, drinking coconuts and looking lovingly into each other's eyes and solving the world's problems. And of course I said, I'm this smart guy from the Silicon Valley. I have all the knowledge in the world and all I'm going to do is teach the rest of the world how to survive, right? Turns out That's not what I did, right? So the first couple of months, everybody hated me because the thing was I was talking about stuff that didn't make sense to them, right? It was raining, it was miserable, right? And what I eventually did was, that's a picture of me training my dogs. So I took out all the street dogs around the village and I collected them and started training them because I just couldn't handle the concept of like, how was I failing, right? And that's what I did for, I think, a couple of months. Then something really interesting happened. I'd go to the local production center, they make clothes out there, and there was a school right next door, and I'd use the computer. And you see those two guys there, they come up to me and they say, what are you doing? Well, I'm using the computer. Oh, so you know how to use the computer? Yeah, I guess I do. Okay, so you think you can teach us? Like, sure, okay, let's bring it on. So those two come in, soon enough, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, 8 become 16. And pretty soon, all the parents were knocking on the doors. They said to the principal's door and saying, I hear you got this guy from the US. He seems to know computers. Can you make sure that they teach our kids too? All right, so at this point, there's a problem. Because now I had to teach 160 kids, okay? And I don't know anything about teaching. And so what I did was, I started creating a curriculum. Around the same time, so some of my friends in the US, they called me up and they said, listen, we have this nonprofit. We've heard of this guy called Ramanjaniya Raju, right? He stayed in the village. He's a son of a farmer. He's a farmer. And, you know, he's not very educated formally, but he's done some really interesting stuff in computer training. So do you think you can work with him and evaluate how good he is? Because if he's really good, we'd like to take him and have him train people in other schools. I said, sure. Come on in, Mr. Raju. So that's Mr. Raju on the other side, right? He comes in and he starts training. And I'm still thinking I'm this hotshot, right? And about 3 days into the experience after he teaches, all the kids are like, got their collars up, they're walking with a swagger, you know, they're like, man, I'm good. I'm like, oh my God, I never taught anybody that much, right? What is this guy teaching in 3 days that's fundamentally changed the way the kids behaves, right? So I go in and I start sitting into his classroom. And what I realized at that point was he had a very simple formula. He said, listen, you're going to learn, you're going to write your notes for 40 minutes, and then you're going to come and learn for 40 minutes, and you will teach somebody else for 40 minutes. And the very act of teaching somebody for 40 minutes gave these kids confidence. Even the most quiet kid at the back of the classroom now was empowered to teach somebody else. And that's what made this huge change. I was like, wow, right? This is the program that makes sense, right? And that was also the first realization for me is it's not about me, right? It's not my ego that makes a difference. There's so many people that are so brilliant out there. Maybe I could just hang with them and maybe improve it a little bit, right? But let's see what we can do with that, right? So interestingly enough, we said, all right, so that's great. So we're going to do something. He said, we still noticed there was a lot of indiscipline in the program. So, you know, kids would come, they'd jump around. And then one day I was just noticing outside all the slippers were haphazard. I said, okay, what happens if you make people put all their slippers in order, right? Turns out, as soon as you go into the classroom, the disciplinary problems drop. Because what they did outside the classroom, just before they entered, made a huge, profound difference in the way they looked at the class. So they start putting their slippers in order, immediately all the disciplinary problems stopped, and there was no punishments. Nobody had to shout on anybody. It was a completely self-regulated system. Great, right? Then we did another experiment. We said, what if we give a group of people everything, right? You give as much computer time as you want, as much electricity as you want, whatever it is, right? Complete freedom. Versus the other place, you only have power for, 8 hours. So you have access for only 40 minutes, right? You have no other access. You have to come in and you have to come in from a long distance. Turns out, people get 40% more marks when they have nothing as compared to when they have everything. Because whatever little they have, they think it is really important for them. I was like, wow, that's really cool. So then, we did this other experiment. So, in the school, our attendance rates were as low as about 40% because some of the kids would be disabled kids, so they would go out home to get their pension, and they go out for about 15 days or so, and then they would not come back. So by the time they come back, everything that was taught to them is forgotten. Right? So we said, what can we do to change that? And so I started looking around, and so every day at 4 o'clock, these kids would come in with a thermos of tea from the cafeteria. They'd fill in the tea for the teachers, and then they'd vanish. Like, where are these kids going? And then one day I start following these kids around, and I notice they're all going behind the shed. They're all sitting down, oh, we got some tea, right? I'm going to pour some, and I'm going to drink, and they're all sharing it. Like, wow. These kids think tea is really important. The very fact that they're drinking the same tea that the teachers are drinking is important for them. So like, okay, we changed the rule and we said, what if, right, all the kids that are there, right, the kid that gets the highest attendance gets to drink tea with the teacher. And the teacher serves the student before they serve themselves, right? And interestingly enough, the attendance rate shot up. Right? They shot up to 85% plus and it's been continuing for the last 4 years. There's been no drop in attendance. Right? I've had parents come to me and tell me, what are you doing in school? Right? My kid always cries. If he by a single day, he starts crying and he says, take me back to school because I'm not going to get my tea for a week. Right? So, really interesting, right? So, the realization that I got is how you teach it. It's not what you teach. It's how you teach it. That's the fundamental difference, right? So then, we came here, right? So we taught everybody in our school, computers, we did all that stuff. And then, Mr. Raju went back home and it was great. But then there were a couple of girls. So those two girls on the right-hand side that you see in the first picture, these two girls were toppers, right? But their mom didn't have the wherewithal. One of them didn't have a dad. So mom would say, there's 9th standard. The mom would say, I'm going to get you married off. I can't afford you. That was about, I think not the 9th standard. She was probably in the 8th standard. But she said, I can't afford to pay for your fees. I'm going to get you married, right? And this girl would come up and cry all the time, right? She's like, oh, I'm going to get married. I don't know if this is the last year I'm going to see you. I'm going home and I'm getting married. So we said, all right, wait, let's not panic. We brought in all the people that wanted to do something, put them together in a room and said, okay, let's figure out, let's brainstorm and see what do we know and what do we know and how can we do it, right? So all the kids got together and they said, we know computers. Okay, great. So what do we do with that? How do we make money? Like we can go into the villages and teach people computers for 500 rupees each. Okay, that works. So how do we do this? So they came up with the whole plan. We went out to villages and we started training people. By the time we were done, we trained about 1,600 people across Visakhapatnam district. Right? And all the money that they came, every summer holidays, they would come and spend time with me for the 3 years that I was at the non-profit, right? They would come spend time with me and we would go out into villages and train people. And all the money that they gathered, they used that to pay their fees. So they paid up to 50% of their fees. So this is a picture of, at the end of the training program, at the end of, going out to the villages, we would invite all the parents to come into the temple and we would have them give out checks. So that the kids knew that this was the money I earned in my summer vacation, right? Turns out those girls that were upset about getting married, they're now in agricultural college on their way to becoming agricultural scientists today. Right? And this was actually one of the most profound realizations that I had in this whole experience, right? After having spent 3 years in India, in rural India, I realized the problem in India is not money, right? The problem anywhere in the world is not money, right? It's attitude, right? It's in the mind, it starts and ends in the mind. So we said, all right, so what does that mean? If you create problem solvers, you solve the problem, right? And that's what the idea was. A lot of my students were very hungry because they didn't have things that they wanted at home, right? They were incredibly hungry to do something else. They were also willing to be uncomfortable. They were willing to kind of step out from what their peers were doing, and they did it, right? And that's what we realized. So throughout the program, in the 3 years that we were there, we were creating problem solvers. And that was my aha moment. And we said, hunger plus discomfort results in problem solvers. So what did we do? I come back to Hyderabad, and that was the time I was pretty disillusioned. In fact, I didn't have the time to process everything. But I was like, India is really hard to work for, and I'm like, I want to go back to the US and screw India. Let's go make money in the US. And my wife, thank God for that. She turns to me and says, you know what, Prasad? You can't let a small problem come in your way and give up, right? You got to double down on it. So I'm like, okay, so what can I do to double down? Because my wife obviously loves India, so I want to stay in India. So we start thinking about it, and the realization comes, why don't we set up a design school that creates problem solvers? So the problem then was, can we create 10x problem solvers? Right? That was the idea behind that. So now, it's been about a year and a half, about 2 years in fact, where we started a design program. It's called UX Design Academy. The attitude there is we go select the hungriest folks. We don't care about degrees. We don't care about their background. We go get the hungriest folks. Turns out about 40% are polytechnic graduates. About 60% of the people are engineering graduates in different kinds of programs. They go through a grueling 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, 6-month program, right? Intense pressure is given. They get problems that most people would do, as a part of their PhD thesis of some sort, right? They're asked to solve the problem and they constantly fail. They're told that they're going to fail and they fail regularly and they're told why they fail as well. So at the end of it, so that's a picture we had Deb Aoki, who's a really good anime artist. She came in from Japan to teach our guys. And then that's Ramanujan, one of our teammates. He actually worked for 3 days at a stretch and went to sleep in the office. And I had to take that picture. We also go out and try to solve interesting problems. So one of the things that we said is, can you go solve a problem about animal welfare? So our team went out and they spent a whole month working with different people in Blue Cross as well as other policy-making bodies to understand how animal welfare works. And they came out with a solution that works for it, right? So we basically challenge our folks with impossibly difficult problems. And at the end of 6 months, there is no guarantee that everybody graduates, right? There will be a small percentage of them that will fail. And that's fine, right? Because you have to kind of come up to that standard or it doesn't work. But then at the end of it, right, this is another picture where we say because it's such an intense program, psychologically people struggle with it. So what we do is we have a mentorship program. Everybody has a mentor, right? And this is an example where it's a mark sheet. It's a negative mark sheet. This lady got 1,600 in minus marks, right? She started off from 100 and then we reduced the marks in increments of 2 marks each. Because at the end of the day, a designer think at great detail and they have to think about even a problem that looks really simple, you have to solve it, and you have to think about all the intricacies that come about. So this is an example where she got minus 1,600 and that's fine because we encourage our people to fail. Failure is okay. We have a saying in our school that says, unless you're failing, you're not passing. And so that's how it is. And so what was the result of all of that, right? We have a team of 22 people. They've gone out and solved, so these are all graduates. They've gone out and solved amazing problems. How many of you have heard of this company called Culture Machine? Or Being Indian? Right? So they actually went to that Being Indian. Being Indian came and they said, you know what? I need to create a product that's 60x more productive, right? Guess what? Our guys did it, right? They did it. They did 10x. As of January this year, it's going to be 20x as of December this year, right?